The next statement we have on our outline is this: salvation is not a legal issue. When a person is being encouraged to become a Christian, we need to understand that it does not happen through a legal transaction. Now, for the most part, I think you will hear a very common statement in Christian circles is, we are not saved by law, we are saved by grace. But I want to show you this morning that in our preaching, even though we say that with our mouth, that most of our preaching is actually legal. That most of the efforts we engage in to bring people to salvation is that we encourage them to embrace a legal transaction with God. The law is for those who are governed by unrighteousness. In other words, when an individual has willingly surrendered to the desire to do their own thing their own way, when they have become unrighteous, then they are in need of a legal external force to regulate their behavior and their conduct. The law is for those who are unrighteous. It needs to be present in order to discourage them from doing what they would do if they were not threatened by punishment or if they were not promised a reward. 1 Timothy 1, 8 through 11.
But we know that the law is good if one uses it lawfully, realizing the fact that law is not made for a righteous person, but for those who are lawless and rebellious, for the ungodly and sinners, for the unholy and profane, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers and immoral men, and homosexuals and kidnappers and liars and perjurers, and whatever else is contrary to sound teaching, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, with which I have been entrusted.
So you see what Paul is doing is he's setting two things against each other. He's saying there is a legal way of approaching people, and that legal way is for the unrighteous. It's for the ungodly, for the profane, the unholy. But then there is this thing that is according to the glorious gospel. And it is a different arrangement that God wants to have with human beings and mankind. I'm going to offer you the first portion of an illustration which will give a picture of legal government operating in the relationship between a father and his son. Okay? And then we will give the rest of the illustration once we talk about the nature of what God is planning to accomplish when we properly respond to the gospel. So the illustration is this. If a father and a son have a legal relationship, purely a legal relationship, if the relationship they have is governed by the principles we've just talked about, then we look at this scenario. We have a man who is going to have a business meeting in his backyard with some business associates. And they're going to have a cookout. And they're going to talk about business. So Saturday morning, when this business meeting is supposed to take place, the father says to his son, I have a very important meeting this afternoon. We're having some business associates over. We're going to have a cookout. But I need you to clean up the yard for me. The grass needs mowed and there's a couple bushes that need trimmed. If the son has a legal mindset, if the son has a legal relationship with his father, then when the father asked the son to mow the yard and trim the bushes, the son's basic attitude and response to the father is what? If it is a legal mindset, what's the son concerned about? What's that?
How much you going to pay me?
How much are you going to pay me? In other words, if the reward is significant enough, I will consider regulating my behavior to do what you've asked me to do. My consideration and the regulation of my behavior and my conduct is based on what I get out of this deal. It's based on the reward that I receive if I do what I'm being asked to do. Now the other side, if the relationship is maybe a little bit uglier and a little bit more strained, he's not going to ask the father how much the reward is. He's going to ask the father, if I don't do it, what are you going to do to me? You see? And his concern there is punishment. So the idea is, if the punishment is bad enough, I'll do it to avoid the punishment. Okay? That is a legal transaction. That's a legal mindset. That's a legal heart attitude or approach toward relationship, where the son's behavior and the regulation of his behavior hinges on whether the reward is good enough or the punishment is bad enough. Okay? Now, there are times in the relationship between a child and a parent where legal considerations must be employed. But is that the nature of a healthy relationship? No. And in every child-parent relationship, the parent has in mind what they can do to develop the child's character to such a degree that they do not have to continue to be under a legal relationship. You want your child at some point to transcend the need for the law. And that happens in conjunction with certain internal realities taking place. So that a person who never develops beyond legal external forms of government will carry that into all of their social relationships. And as you know, I go in every Wednesday and I deal with men and women in the prison, and the reason they are in the prison is because they need legal relationships of a severe sort. And a prison system represents some of the more extreme legal forms of regulating people's behavior. Now, God is aiming for something. He has done something in history that is intended that when a human being properly sees and understands what it is, they move beyond the need for legal considerations and regulations in their life. And there is this central, crucial, pivotal reality that takes place that changes this whole deal. So we're going to talk a little bit about the gospel, and then I'm going to give you what I believe to be the most common way that we pervert the gospel. The gospel is the power of God unto salvation. That's what Paul refers to it as in Romans 1:16. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation. There are predominantly two ways we can conceive of power. We can conceive of power as either physical force or moral impact. Now, let me give you an example of physical force.